So you are doing a course now on the PARALLAX Academy for rebuilding spirituality that starts Sunday, April 17th. That would be 4 pre-recorded modules and 4 interactive Zoom calls. But the pressing issue or the pressing question is, of course, why rebuilding spirituality in the first place? Why do we need to do that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think it's a mixed answer, right? Partly it's about reinvigorating spirituality, which is something we always have to do in human history. And partly it's about adapting spirituality to the moment we live in, to the new society, the new technology, and the new understandings and the new languaging that we have at this moment in history. So I think what we see a lot in the world are people who have a strong spiritual drive, and they're attracted to and channeled into old-fashioned forms of spirituality that sometimes work for them and sometimes don't.
Right.
And other people who are very attentive to the world, to its needs, to new language and new philosophy, new intellectual capacities, and they are out of touch with authentic spiritual practice, with making real sacrifice, real discipline, attaining real altered states, picking up the actual skills necessary to live out a spiritual life. So what we want to do is bring those together and sort of collectively start generating a dharma that lives in the niche of the current and emerging world. And the kind of spirituality we tended to get out of postmodernity wasn't really sufficient. Postmodernity gave us all these critical, analytical, deconstructive skills, but the spirituality that came along with that was very corporate, very relativistic, very narcissistic. A lot of people just giving themselves permission to have their own beliefs and values without challenging themselves to any of the rigor that was traditionally associated with spiritual practice, or with any of the need to undermine their reactions or to gain skill and capacity and strength. And in a way, a lot of skepticism about the reality of these things, right? If you say, well, if the way we think about altered states of consciousness is socially constructed, well, that's very interesting. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't therefore try to have those experiences. They
Right.
can still be the most important experiences, even though your interpretive structure and your way of talking about them has changed. So a lot of people have gotten hung up in the new insights and held back from the actual experience. And that's it's a new task and it's a shared task.
Right.
So what we're doing in this course is just setting that up. I can bring in my own insights. I can bring in my own guidelines of practice and things like that. But what we mostly want to do is open a space so that we can go forward together and start to invent what this is, because there are a lot of interesting, smart people who are working on this. And if we could bring them together, if we could start to have courses where they bring forth their challenging ideas and their challenging practice and help all of us stay at the leading edge,
Yep.
then we might really have something. Nobody can do it on their own. So the
Right.
most important thing is to start holding space for us to share and do it together. One of the things that really excites me about it is the possibility of cultivating spiritual life outside of spiritual belief systems. And that could be believing for or against traditional spirituality, right? I want to help people to get better at living a spiritual life. If they want to do that under the design of a traditional spiritual practice, if they already have a spiritual path, how do they do that better? If they think of themselves as secular, how can they be secular in a way that still gets those benefits, right? If they want to come together and say, this is a whole new spirituality, this is integral, post-metaphysical, metamodern, whatever, that's fine. But you don't have to side with any of those discourses. The point is to figure out what are the real mechanics of it. Because we're often very superficial about it, right? We think, well, should I be a Christian or a Buddhist or an atheist?
Yeah.
Or an integralist? Well, are you actually able to be any of those things, right? Do you understand viscerally how you would do any of those things well? If you were going to do yoga, if you were going to meditate, if you were going to pray, if you were going to attend a shamanic ritual, Are you going to be able to derive any benefit from that? Are you the kind of person who has the basic skills to be able to have that experience for real, rather than just superficially engage with it? What makes the difference between knowledge and wisdom?
Right.
And wisdom is knowledge with development. Right? It has a sense of participating in an evolutionary universe, that we're doing something that moves us forward along a certain track, unfolds our patterns somehow. Right? So those are the basic skills. That's the way. And the way can take many different forms, but it implies a journey, it implies a change, it implies a certain kind of becoming yourself. And we need to know what the basic tools that are necessary to undertake that journey are. And we have a sense, if you survey all of spiritual history, but we don't know whether that's complete or not, right? We have a lot of contemporary technologies, such as computational science, that suggest that all the patterns that we're capable of recognizing are just a tiny little piece of the possible pattern universe. Are there forms of spirituality we haven't even encountered yet? Are there all kinds of new practices we could make or improvise if we knew what the basic tools were, if we had our hands on those basic controls? Well, I think a huge part of this is coming together and asking ourselves, outside of the traditional discourse and outside of the traditional dogma, and even outside of idealistic postmodern integrative discourse, outside of all of that, what do we really know? What are the tools? What are the buttons you can push inside yourself that help you move forward and accelerate down that track of personal change and growth and depth of being? When it comes to doing the practice parts, there's a couple of things that I'm very excited about working on with people and trying to guide people through a way of sampling different ways of doing these processes. I'm very excited about people exploring and combining their internal systems, right? Heart, mind, and body are the simplest way to think about that, although there's lots of different internal systems. How do you find those? How do you separate them out? How do you bring them back together in a way that generates more than the sum of its parts? I'm excited about trying to guide people through the ability to shift their attention into different kinds of basic states. And I'm also very excited about trying to work with factors that are seemingly perceived as negative, right? That we need to be dealing with things that our ancestors might have called guilt and remorse and suffering. We need to be dealing with how you accept your death, how you accept the possible doom of the world that you live in, how you accept friction and cognitive dissonance and inner strife and difficulty and pain. These are all important parts of spirituality, which very often get left out of the modern, postmodern, commercial, feel-good spirituality. But that's where the rubber really meets the road, is how do you handle the dark elements that you naturally want to exclude? How do you bring them in, and how do you process them in a way that gives you more depth, more groundedness, more being, more capacity?